Hello again, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again. My name is Will Critchlow, founder and CEO at SearchPilot, and we're talking, as usual, all kinds of search and discoverability things. And I have the perfect guest to talk to about that this week, joined by Heather Physioc, Chief Discoverability Officer at VML. And Heather and I go way back. She's spoken at our conferences back in the day when we used to run those, and very memorably for me, gave a great talk at MozCon almost a decade ago, I think it was, Heather, 8 years, something like that, where you covered a maturity framework that has A, stuck in my mind, B, I've used a ton of times, referenced in all kinds of places, and I think was quite influential to quite a few people. As I mentioned, a few years have passed since then, and the industry is moving as fast as it ever has right now. How are you thinking about maturity these days?
Yeah, well, it's a good thing we built that as a living, changing, breathing thing, right? Like we built it originally with the expectation that it was going to have to evolve with the technologies. And I don't know that I anticipated it would change this dramatically this quickly. Like at the time, AI was in the really mature side of the maturity model. And if you were experimenting with it, you were considered mature in SEO at that time. But yeah, it looks a little bit different these days. I mean, the big thing that comes to mind for me is that sort of messy middle of search has been massively compressed because of this new AI-driven zero-click environment. There's actually more emphasis on the retrievability and sort of technical infrastructure than I anticipated. I didn't think that was going to become more prominent. I actually anticipated it would be less prominent, and I was wrong. Things like how we measure the effectiveness of search are now changing. It used to be pretty straightforward analytics around rankings and clicks and traffic. And now sort of that last click measurement of the effectiveness of search went from being on its way out to completely irrelevant and obsolete almost. And yet we don't have a new way of measuring search success that the industry fully agrees on. One thing that I do think advanced in a way that makes sense to me and that we kind of anticipated is that connection between the retail experience and the owned experience and how those play alongside one another, how they influence one another. That has paced forward as expected for me. Things like reviews and user-generated content and that external validation has increased more than I thought it would. And something I did not expect, at least in the retail environment, was this idea of universal carts where you can potentially shop from multiple retailers, multiple vendors at the same time in the same shopping cart through some sort of shared embedded experience. That was not anywhere on my bingo card back when we made that maturity model. So a lot of that stuff has moved forward, I would say, since we started that 8 years ago.
Which is good, and it's always fun to find the things that that we're right about and the things we're wrong about. I think that's what keeps us all on our toes. We've got plenty of meat to get into here, but so let's start with the technical end of things. You mentioned, and I think probably a lot of people would have agreed with you that at the time you thought maybe we'd be de-emphasizing this over time, and I guess that's coupled to the fact that at that time, Google was improving its ability to interpret any kind of content anywhere on the web, JavaScript interpretability improving, and it's seeming also, I think, simultaneously as though the frameworks and the kind of the tools that engineering teams and product teams are using to build websites were also standardizing.
Exactly.
So what have you seen since then that has changed your mind or made you realize that that's played out differently?
Yeah, totally. I heard a lot of technical SEOs and developers talking about how to bake these things in. And so it was less necessary for search experts to come in and fix broken things after the fact. Some of them just became more commoditized in general. And so I think all of those things are still critically important, right? Like the crawling, the indexing, the mobile friendliness. Those things are all still relevant, but they're sort of the assumption. They're table stakes. Nowadays, I do have some chips placed on structured data becoming increasingly important. I mean, the internet is still a hot mess, and even more of a hot mess than it was 8 years ago. So, in order for this stuff to be fully machine readable and have this connected brand data core, how and what we structure into our data, I think is going to be increasingly important. And I think there are just new techniques and tools for how we feed that data into these machines that's going to need increased attention. That's the long and short of it with technical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and especially in retail and e-commerce where the product feed is becoming such a big deal as the crossover, can never decide whether that's paid or organic or both. But that's kind of key technical part of it
For sure.
in that mix. I'm unsure on the structured data. Different days I go back and forth on it's the most important thing or it'll become obsoleted by natural language being understood fully by the machines. I can't quite decide, but I think probably I would come down in agreement with you that it's going to, at least over the next few years, probably grow in importance. Certainly some of our tests have shown that it is still important in different situations. And it reminds me a lot, actually, if you go back even further, so we're talking back a decade, but you go back a decade or even 15 years before that, and people were even back then talking about technical SEO becoming a solved problem, right? Like the CMS will just do it, was the thing. Before the frameworks were going to do it, the CMSs were going to do it. And I don't know, that hasn't really seemed to have panned out quite that way. And so maybe I shouldn't be as too bullish on schema getting just understood either.
Yeah, and even beyond like just schema tagging and markup, it's structuring and cleaning up our product feeds and our data and creating that source of truth. Because right now, all of the junk that's out on the web is really making truthiness hard to find and hard to understand and discern. And this is a bit of a detour here, but these LLM search platforms eventually are going to be competing on trust, just like we saw the search engines have to do 15, 20 years ago. Because the web got flooded with junk. We were all told that we needed to create 300 words of good, unique content. I'm sure you remember, like every page had a keyword or whatever. And so that's what everybody did. And there was just this massive sea of sameness that the search engines had a hard time parsing through to figure out what should climb to the top. Well, we're seeing that same inundation of junk slop content flood the web. And people know they cannot fully trust these LLM platforms. And as they're going head to head out in the world, the Claudes and Perplexities and ChatGPTs and Geminis of the world, the one that sort of wins the lion's share of users is eventually going to be the one that people can trust. And so they're going to have to be able to discern that truth and accuracy much more clearly. So that's sort of why I'm placing some chips on how we clean up, organize, and streamline our sources of truth and the information therein. That seems like it's something that has to happen as a natural evolution of this process.
Yeah, and somehow demonstrate that as well, because especially on your own website, you can write anything, as we all know. And so I've actually been surprised at how little emphasis there's been. It seems to me that some of these newer entrants have been somewhat surprised by the adversarial nature of information retrieval, where if they had read some of their history or employed a few Googlers, they might have realized that as soon as they started rewarding or displaying certain kinds of things in response to certain kinds of prompts, everybody was going to do those things. And you see it with whether it's listicles or top 10 or this versus that or whatever it might be. You play stupid games, win stupid prizes, but at the moment, it's going to win. That stuff works in the short term, and it's been surprising to me that they seem to be surprised.
Yeah. Like I say we, like it's just the SEO industry. It's like anybody who's existed on the internet and wanted to connect with people, they want to know it works. And so as soon as we get a clue as to what works, we're going to try that and test and learn and whatever, or exploit that depending on who you are.
For sure. And both in different situations. And the flip side, though, is that I am particularly excited by the fact that there's competition in the broader discovery space.
Yeah.
Even if search,
yeah,
even if search narrowly defined is still not super competitive, I think the fact that discovery is competitive again is actually just great for everyone. It's great for users, consumers, and actually I think probably ultimately good for Google, or at least good for Google's technology. We'll see how good for their business it turns out to be, although they seem to be doing fine. But I think that's the other element that comes into the technical side, is because we're not just in we're not just playing to one audience. It has to be more broadly compatible and prepared for. And you see it with some of the crawlers not interpreting JavaScript, for example, in as sophisticated a way as Google does. I think it's a little bit back to the browser war days, where does your site render in Internet Explorer was a question for those of us who were web devs back in the many years ago, and I think that similar kind of is your site technically visible to both ChatGPT and Perplexity and Claude and all the way down the long tail is more interesting and more important than those kind of questions have been.
Yeah. It's interesting how many parallels there are to the olden days. I just keep noticing the same patterns, and that's sort of how I keep predicting what's next. It's like, I remember that accessibility, indexability, crawlability was the big thing. And then it was trust and credibility signal. I just feel like this is the same exact story arc as what we saw with the search engines. It's just slightly different technologies. And that's kind of why this doesn't freak me out all that much, this whole AI search era. I feel like we've seen the behaviors that these platforms have to take. We've seen how humans have had to learn fundamentally new ways to search before. I don't know, like any of us have been doing this for more than a minute, like have some clues that give us a reasonable idea of where this is going to go next and how we need to adapt just before it gets there.
Yeah.
Delusionally optimistic.
I'm very optimistic by default, but also specifically about some of this stuff as well, both in the sense that, we do jobs that didn't exist when we went to college. And, as I said in your introduction, I think Chief Discoverability Officer is a great job title, but there's no way that was what you wanted to be when you were little, right?
No, I wanted to be a journalist.
And so in the same way, I think the next generation is going to do jobs that we never thought of or never imagined. But also, I remember the excitement of, I loved the mobile revolution, and before that, when the web was invented, that was really cool. And I think it feels very similar actually to that kind of .com era, right down to the build out of infrastructure that will be used one day, no doubt. But will it be used in the way it's imagined and envisioned as it's being built? But anyway, this is not an economics discussion. Let's keep on working through. So the next thing I think you mentioned was about measurement. And this is something that we think a lot about, obviously, because when we're running our tests, we have to ground them in some kind of measurement of some form. And the way that we've been evolving this and our thinking has been very much what we call multi-metrics. So considering a range of different kinds of metrics and having some of them as the thing that we're trying to optimize, and have some of them being guardrails saying, we want to keep an eye on this one and make sure we don't screw it up in the process. And then some of them being inputs into future hypotheses, right? So like, we noticed that this metric moved when we did this other thing. So we're looking at clicks, we're looking at impressions, we're looking at where we can, business metrics, revenues, bookings, whatever they might be, conversions. But yeah, what are you seeing? Where are you going? What are you... This maybe is an area for less optimism by the time like it's all just a bit more broken right now.
Yeah, it's broken or nascent, depends on how you look at it. But this is actually kind of what I've always appreciated about what you and your work has done, is taking a more whole view of measurement, not purely optimizing for rankings and traffic, but what does this mean for downstream business impact? And so that's very encouraging to hear that that's still how you're thinking about it and building things into there. The reality is, like, people are still using traditional search too, and that those metrics of success are still relevant and still valuable to the business today. And so we cannot overinvest in LLM discoverability at the expense of those real tangible business metrics. Whereas we do not actually have good AI LLM search metrics today. Like we have a few things that a few platforms have built around based on the things that they can do. We're of course measuring things like what frequency are we being cited or named in the answers, and trying to keep track of how accurate those answers are about our businesses and how much are we influencing the answers that are given. But the extreme personalization at scale of these AI LLM search functions makes that really, really challenging. Sentiment. Can we just talk about this sentiment idea for a hot second? I'd love to know how you're thinking about it, but like I take issue with it. AI is not sentient, therefore it doesn't have sentiment. But also I think about how PR tools, when they look at sentiment, they say that everything is horrible. Social listening tools, everything is horrible to neutral. It's kind of the opposite in AI LLM platforms. Everything is great. So I don't know. I just take issue with that as a useful metric, whereas I've seen some of these platforms talk about like word associations and whether those are positive or critical. That seems to kind of be useful, actionable information. But AI sentiment is so weird to me. But anyway, sorry, that was a digression, and I'd love to hear your point of view on that. But I think the way you're thinking about it with a more whole view of the entire ecosystem of things that you can influence, those levers you can pull, is going to be the next big problem to solve. I mean, that's certainly what we're trying to solve for with our clients, is what to measure, how, and how does it fit into the whole picture of the digital marketing ecosystem.
Yeah, and you're right to call it nascent, because I think none of us know what the platforms themselves are going to provide us with. What we have to, evolve in our own measurement, whether it be log files or web analytics or agentic conversions, like who knows. But we'll have certain first-party data that we can gather, whatever they do, and we'll have certain kinds of things that we have to wait and see what we're given, right? Whether it's in Search Console, whether it's in some potential future ChatGPT console, or whatever it might look like. The sentiment stuff is interesting, actually. So one of the very first software products that we tried to build, what we did build, it wasn't commercially successful, but it worked technically, was many years ago. We built a tool that was called Reputation Monitor, and this was back in, I don't know, I forget, 2006, 2007, something like that. And
almost 20 years ago.
Yeah, and it was definitely in the era of RSS feeds. I remember that because it was based on the idea that we were trying to do a kind of smarter, better Google Alerts, and this in particular at the time, there was no one source that was particularly great for doing that kind of thing. So we were aggregating lots of different sources that could give you signal, right? Hey, your brand or your keyword was mentioned in this place. Then we were aggregating it all, and it all came in via RSS. And then we did some smart stuff and then output a single RSS feed so that you could kind of consume this aggregated stuff. And we tried to do some sentiment analysis then, but obviously the tools available to do that were limited, and it was incredibly basic. It was incapable of detecting sarcasm, irony, even negation sometimes, right? So, if somebody had said, this is not very good, it might just pick up very good. And so it was really difficult to make that kind of side of things work. And so I've been an enthusiastic, excited consumer of the way that computers can now magically understand words. And I think that getting that kind of at scale report of what the human's sentiment was, and your point about the machine itself isn't sentient and therefore can't have a sentiment, I think it doesn't necessarily mean that it can't summarize or output the sentiments it's seeing elsewhere. Again, as I said, we're not going to do the economics thing. We probably shouldn't do the philosophy thing. I'm certainly no philosopher. I'm pretty confident these things are not sentient now.
Oh, no.
I don't know what the boundary is of could they in principle ever be, and is silicon sentience possible? Anyway, that's a whole other podcast. We can do that another day. I'll leave you with one thought of mine on that, which is one of the objections to it is that they're just token completers, right? They're just guessing. Their job is just figuring out the next word in the sequence. Spicy autocomplete. And my probably contrarian perspective is I'm not certain that I'm not just autocomplete. I think it's possible that that's just what's going on in my brain. And this whole thing that feels like consciousness on the inside might just be spicy autocomplete. I don't know. Anyway, as I say, I'm not a philosopher. So
Very matrix. Yeah, I mean, part of I guess even beyond like sentience and sentiment, it's like I don't know the mechanisms of how those things are calculated fully. I don't know what volume of input or the sources of all of the input that are formulating those opinions, those sentiments. So color me skeptical.
yeah, I think that's totally fair. The thing I'm actually equally, if not more, skeptical about is the all of the stuff that drives off synthetic prompts. And this ties into what you were saying about personalization. So any time we're doing prompts to see what the model says about our brand or our customers' brands, our clients' brands, I'm skeptical about that output for a variety of reasons. One is I think it's not deterministic, right? So you just do it 100 times, you get 80 different answers.
Yeah.
If 100 different people do it, you'll get 100 different answers. And also, we have no idea at the moment how people are actually using, beyond some very, very broad brushstroke data that people are using it to book travel or to research products or whatever. Like I think OpenAI published a pie chart of like the kinds of things people are using it for, but it's not granular. It's not telling us down to the prompt level, so we don't really know whether people are doing things that look like head searches, whether they're doing things that look like paragraphs of text, whether they look like mini novels. I suspect the answer is all of the above. And I'm sure that some people are just typing in things that look like queries, right? Flight to New York or whatever. But even when you do that, the fact that it's driving off the memory, the history, all those other things means that the way I've been describing it is we're in search volume 1. What's the search volume? It's single. It's just one. And that means that anytime you're trying to track or analyze queries and volumes and prompts, that's the bit that I'm probably like most skeptical about right now.
Well, yeah, imagine if you think the first query is unique, wait until you get the follow-up question. If somebody's shopping for a certain product in there and at first they start with that generic query, that follow-up question is going to be much more like, well, actually I meant specific to my needs in this unique way. Everything from that point forward is going to be entirely unique and personalized. How do you capture that?
Well, and that's why one of the reasons why we're working so much in retail is that I'm both bullish about that as an industry, because I think humans are going to keep buying stuff, even if the checkout is agentic, right? We're going to keep shopping. We're going to do that shopping online. I think more people, in 5 years' time, more people are going to be buying more stuff on the internet than they bought today or 5 years ago. And so I'm kind of bullish in a broad stroke about that. But also, because there's the conversion point, there will always be something we can measure, right? Again, even if it's an agentic checkout, we know that checkout happened, even if it happened on a different platform and it happened via API or whatever. Like there's still something happened that we know about, and that has to continue because ChatGPT isn't going to ship you a pair of sneakers or manufacture anything. And so there's a place for the brand, for the manufacturer, for the retailer, for the logistics somewhere in that mix. That's not a satisfying answer if you're in other industries, right? If what you sell is electronic, if what you, media or advertising, all these things are going to be, they're already very, very disrupted, but it's going to be much trickier, I think, to see what the measurement path looks like in those cases.
You're certainly echoing the point that like the pure traffic metric or pure rankings metric isn't going to be sufficient. It's what is that downstream impact on business, sales, conversions, actions.
Yeah. And then the odd thing we're seeing, especially in e-commerce and retail, is that year over year, traffic down slightly, revenue up from organic.
Interesting. Overall, like that is an industry-wide.
Yeah, well, we're certainly seeing it play out in lots of places. It's not uniformly of everywhere true, but it is true in quite a lot of places. And trying to figure out what are the right metrics what are the KPIs, what are the things to target and chase after versus what are the things that you should be concerning yourself about. Is fun times.
Wild times.
So that leads us a little bit into the organizational side of things, which you touched on when you were talking about the maturity. So how would you describe what you're seeing because you work with a wide range of large organizations, probably a range of sizes, but particularly all the way up to large organizations. So what are you seeing? How stable, calm, cool, and collected are people as they approach these changing
stable,
times?
calm, cool, and collected is not how I would phrase it. No, I mean, and I've been on the circuit talking about breaking down silos and how disciplines need to collaborate, and maturity is certainly an integration of disciplines and people and process and technologies and knowledge and all of that. It went from, boy, that would be nice if we could transform our organizations to collaborate better and have a more integrated approach, to, oh crap, we really need to be doing this or we can't really win in this LLM discovery environment. The good news is for performing well in like the individual channels, your owned, your earned, your influenced, whatever, that is still critically important and perhaps even more important. But it's how do we do that in a cohesive, coordinated way so that this information can be consistently and accurately delivered in these LLMs. So it's finding ways to join forces and not just talking about it, but actually doing it. But that is kind of the biggest problem I'm solving, especially with these larger organizations that have been thinking in this channel mindset for so long. How do we actually bring those parties to the table? I do think that the arrival of these LLM platforms as a search and discovery tool is the thing that is bringing people to the table. So there's the good news. And they are looking to a lot of us in the search space to kind of help chart the path and get everybody on the same page about where to go next. But there's a lot of challenges in enterprise organizations with silos in general. So to overcome that both on the agency side where I live between our disciplines is a little easier than overcoming that on the enterprise client side where the ship just doesn't turn as quickly. And so we have to really work hard to educate and enable clients about that critical need, help them prioritize that next step and just know where to start. It's like completely overwhelming with this bombardment of information and you should be doing that and you're behind if you're not doing this. We're here to kind of help sort that out and align things. Like discoverability transformation around AI is taking up 95% of my weeks now.
I can imagine. What's your take? You've probably had as many conversations as anyone with those kind of senior leaders who, as you mentioned, they've maybe thought in a channel mindset for years.
Yeah.
And I don't know your experience, actually. I'd be curious. My experience is that many of those folks understand media and paid channels better than they understand organic channels, often have come up through that side of the organization. Or if they come in from elsewhere, that's the bit where they're spending the most money, right? So that's the bit where their feet are up against the fire with finances saying, what did you spend that 8, 9, 10 figure sum on is, all of the paid channels. But all of a sudden, AI discovery seems to me to have broken through, and they're is it wrong to say they're more excited about this than they ever were about search? And
excited or anxious?
Everything focused on, interested in, what?
The headlines
why?
were not as big around SEO as they are around AI. So like the immense pressure that all of these companies are under, especially the ones that are publicly traded, to adopt AI, to show up in AI. And some C-level executive is certainly typing in their company or their products and seeing AI results. Like it's inundating the entire space. You cannot watch the news or listen to a podcast without hearing something about AI. It is in every conversation with every client every day.
Yep.
So I never heard that kind of adoption or obsession with SEO. But it's interesting. I
Not
think
with SEO.
more about SEO today than they ever
Yeah.
did when it was the thing.
Right. And I think they've been guided there because of the AI side of things, right? Because the thought
Totally.
process goes AI through Google, through search, through whatever. And you're right, SEO never had that moment, I don't think. But it reminds me of the moment that the web had. It reminds me of that
Yeah,
.com
much more
era,
like that.
right? When, yeah, you turn on CNN, you turn on BBC, you turn on whatever, and everybody's like, have you heard about this web thing? I think it's going to be a really big deal. People are making these websites and they're springing up at like furious pace.
Yeah.
And the amount of investment, and albeit that investment looks quaint when you look back on it now, we saw a stat the other day. Was it that the most recent Anthropic funding round was bigger than the entirety of all VC investments into every .com
Oh my gosh.
in
I
the
believe it
late
too.
90s, which is just like, and that's inflation adjusted, I believe. Anyway, that we need to fact check on that, but there's
Big.
some kind of crazy stat, and yeah, that Google was obviously a hot property when it went public, 20 whatever 4 years ago, and yet somehow the frenzy of everything being all AI all the time is somehow leading to that question of discoverability in a way that it's the first in my career, I think, of seeing just that obsession at
Yeah.
the C-suite or the senior leadership level. So
Yeah, I
it's
think it's
interesting that
both
you're hearing that as well.
excitement and anxiety. Excitement about the profit to be made, the savings to be gained, whatever. Excitement about the new possibilities to be chosen or found, sure. But there's also a lot of anxiety and a lot of pressure to adopt this and figure this out. And so everybody's obsessed with it until they know what to do.
Yeah, and like you said, especially in the public companies, they're definitely feeling
Yeah.
that pressure. Okay, rounding out the conversation, a couple of final avenues to poke down. One is, I was very curious. We've talked at quite a high level about lots of things that are changing or things that we've learned since since the Moscon days. If someone at that, maybe not the kind of C-suite, but if we got, I don't know, VP of digital marketing, that kind of level folks at retailers or in-house folks listening and watching, what would you be advising them? What do you think they should be starting and stopping doing versus a couple of years ago?
Yeah, start, stop, continue, right? The start, and honestly, we should have started this forever ago, but like building that brand data core where your brand and your messaging and your structured data and your product feeds and all of your channels are kind of pulling in a similar direction. There has to be some kind of coherence of messaging and platforms because now they are all being sourced to create these answers. So if you do nothing else, like pick a priority, pick a direction, and go try to win it across channels in a collective, collaborative way. And like I said, that's a huge part of what my work is these days. As I mentioned earlier, how tech and sort of that structured information, product feeds, etc. I think a lot of people treated that like ad ops plumbing for a long time. Like, oh, that's just a thing that we have to do, or we'll get to it eventually. I don't really see the influence now. I think that just became a much bigger deal, especially in the retail space with agentic shopping and universal cart protocol. Like that's gonna make that critically important. It just became a way, way bigger deal.
Yeah, great stuff. So start building the data core, stop treating it like low-level ad ops. Love that. Final thing, which you actually segued nicely into there, is let's just look to that future, that agentic, whatever it might look like. Agentic checkout could be, as you said earlier, universal cart, multi-retailer, even in search. And this is another area where history either teaches us something or could lead us astray. You remember Google Checkout, right, in the Google ads? You used to have the little button to check out right there.
Yeah.
Is this a toy? Is it the future? Or both?
Today it's a toy. I suspect it's the future. Like I see the potential possibilities here and the benefit to doing it, at least to the platforms. The platforms want to keep you in their space and engaging with their products, their ads. That's where their money's going to come from. So I could see them wanting to invest heavily in the ability to have that universal cart, those multi-retailer baskets, the direct in-search checkout. It's frustrating as a marketer. It's frustrating as a brand because you want to bring them into your universe and your little cozy community, and build up that community. But it's harder and harder to get people into that experience. So I don't know. I don't know. Both.
I
Yes,
mean, I think
and somewhere in
quite
between.
quite likely. Yeah, I, for what it's worth, the bit that I think pulls against. So as you said, there's the what do the platforms want? So the big AI frontier folks, what do they want? There's what does the brand and retailer want? There's also just the competitive dynamic between them all. And I think one of the things that I've been quite interested in is as the AI tools get more powerful and they get more general, right? Any of them can do anything, right? You don't need a specific search tool. You don't need a specific agentic tool. You don't need they're just like, you use the one that can do all the things. And that possibly hints at it not happening in the platform exactly so much as the agent going and doing it at the brand.
Yeah.
Right. So it looks like, where I've thought about this is like Apple Pay on steroids. So instead of, in the same way that Apple Pay simplifies that checkout process because you don't have to fill in every fiddly line item of the address fields and so forth, you can go a step earlier than that and be like, yeah, just buy that one. And, your Claude agent or whatever it might be can go and do that in any of the ways that a human could, in any of the ways that the web currently works. So there's an argument for maybe there's less technical disruption because the models and the agents and their harnesses become so capable so fast that you don't need to build the agentic thing. The kind of general agent takes over.
Yeah. And
I already know some people who are giving credit cards.
Measure that agent influenced revenue. How do we measure that? I'm also thinking about DoorDash. You know how DoorDash, you can order from multiple retailers
Yeah.
at once, and they'll hit multiple retailers at once, and that's one basket, one purchase. Like, or
Yep.
if I need to do something in my yard and I have to go to like 3 different retailers to get all the pieces I need to set up the bird bath or whatever, it's just that's a frustrating experience for me as a shopper. So are there possibilities for this to simplify for me by going across all these things, finding the best price, finding the best product for an end-to-end solution, instead of putting all that work on me as a customer?
I mean, I certainly hope as a consumer that stuff's going to get better solved.
Gotcha.
I think my guess of that short-term vision would be yes, but it gets solved by the AI agent going to those different places rather than by a unified actual checkout process. The difference with DoorDash, for example, is you're eating one meal at one moment, right? You want it to all arrive at the same time on the same bike. Whereas the bird bath stuff, it needs to arrive soon enough. But if one thing arrives Tuesday, one thing arrives Wednesday, and you're doing the project on Saturday, and your AI agent knows all of that, then it might trade off and say, actually, it's cheaper to buy this from over there. It'll arrive in time, and so how much is AI innovation versus technical innovation in the checkout or in the retail process? That's some of the fun stuff that I guess we have to wait and see, or maybe build it. Right, the best way to know the future is to build it. So maybe some of your clients are going to be leading the way on that. That's probably a good place to wrap up. On that note, there's going to be lots more changes coming down the pipe, no doubt, and you're going to be busily learning from what folks are doing and also influencing what they're doing. So if people in the audience want to stay up to date with your thinking and your writing and your output, where's the best place to do that?
For sure. Well, the best place to find me is at Heather Physioc on all the things. I'm on way too many of the social networks trying to figure out which one is the new hotness that will replace Twitter after all these years. And so far the answer is none of them. But at Heather
Or all
Physioc.
of them.
All of them. Oh, it's too much.
Too much. We need an AI agent. I mean, that's basically, I'm describing LinkedIn at that point. Right. So on that note, this has been really fun. Thank you for taking the time, Heather. And it's been really great to see you again and just explore all of these exciting avenues. And I'm just great to meet another optimist on this stuff and somebody who's excited about what might come of it all. And it's certainly going to keep us busy, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, this was a heady conversation and I loved it. Thank you, Will.
Take it easy.
Yeah. Talk soon.